Good evening, hello, and welcome to tonight's session of Sustainable You, Green Your Routine with Beneficial Electrification. My name is Kermit Hovey, and I'm primarily wearing my Middleton Sustainability Committee Vice Chair hat, and we'll be facilitating this presentation and conversation co-sponsored by the Middleton Public Library and the Middleton Sustainability Committee. I have the privilege to introduce two individuals who I'm delighted to know through our shared concern with the climate crisis and our work with 350 Madison's Community Climate Solutions team. While Kathy, Susan, and I were founding co-leads of that team, Kathy Kuntz has moved on to become director of the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change. Susan Millar continues in that co-lead role with me and Julia De Palma, but has been recently recognized by Renew Wisconsin for her trailblazing work electrifying her old house. Rather than belaboring their qualifications and expertise, let's launch into having them share it themselves. First, Kathy will talk about beneficial electrification from an overview perspective, and then she'll pass the baton after about 50 minutes to Susan, who will share from the nitty-gritty of her personal case study. We will hold questions until after Kathy and Susan each finish their respective 50-minute presentations. Feel free to pop them into the chat or make notes if you want to remember them to speak directly during our Q&A time. During the Q&A time, you'll be welcome to raise your hands or again, pop your questions into the Q&A or into the chat window, and we will take it from there then. So that's the nub and the heart of my intro. And so Kathy, I'll invite you to get us started.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Kermit. It's terrific to be here with everybody tonight to talk about beneficial electrification. Okay, hang on a second. That's like a speaker 101 thing. In rehearsal, my slides were backwards. Okay, beneficial electrification, what and why? As Kermit said, I'm with Dane County's Office of Energy and Climate Change. County Executive Joe Parisi created our office in 2021 in 2019 to address climate change issues countywide. In 2020, we issued a climate action plan that lays out a plan for cutting countywide emissions in Dane County in half by 2030, which is consistent with what the climate scientists are telling us we need to do. And there are more than 100 recommendations in the plan. I encourage you to check it out online. Those recommendations, though, fall into four big categories. And one of those is beneficial electrification. But I want to put that in the context of the four categories. So the first category of what we need to do is reduce waste. And whether we're talking about energy or food or water or goods or fashion, anytime we're talking about any resource that we have to create and process and move around the country or the globe to get it to you, the consumer, and then you toss it out, that's just a ton of emissions we didn't need to create. So efficiency is kind of a cornerstone of this. That's the first piece. The second piece is that we want to get the energy we use from clean sources. So for electricity, that means wind and solar. Then we want to match our end uses, the things we need energy for, transportation, lighting, cooking, all of that stuff, with the clean sources. That's where beneficial electrification comes in. The final piece for us in Dane County is natural carbon sequestration. So we're lucky enough to have natural areas, trees, prairies where we can store carbon, and we want to expand that storage along with the reductions. So that's kind of just a framework to give you a sense of this. So let's talk a little bit about electricity. The thing that's interesting about electricity right now is it's the energy source we have that keeps getting cleaner. So what this chart is showing you is the carbon dioxide emissions from 1 kilowatt hour. A kilowatt hour is the amount of electricity you would use if you had 10 100-watt light bulbs that were burning for an hour. A typical home in Wisconsin uses about 700 kilowatt hours a month. So in 2018, every kilowatt hour we used represented about almost 1.4 pounds of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. By 2020, that was down under 1.2. That's not true about any other fuel source we have. The gasoline that you used in your car in 2018, every gallon represented about 19 pounds of carbon dioxide, and the gas you use today represented 19 pounds of carbon dioxide. That's chemistry, it's not changing, but because the sources of our electricity are changing, we've got this downward graph. And indeed, if you take that slope that exists in current years and extend it out, you see that by 2050, we're at like 0.10 pounds of carbon dioxide for every kilowatt hour. So a substantial reduction. I'd remind you that Governor Evers has a goal that we're at 0, that our electricity is completely clean by 2050. This graph tells you that seems pretty doable, that 2018 to 2020 was not a notable period for renewable energy, but we're already on this trajectory. It's happening faster. So that's why we're excited about electricity. That's why we talk about electricity as the future. We talk, though, about beneficial electrification because we want to be really deliberate and strategic about how we electrify. We want a lot of benefits to happen. And when we think about beneficial electrification from the theory side of this, there are kind of 3 big benefits we think about. The first is saving customers money on their energy bills. So it's beneficial if it costs you less over time. The second bucket of benefits is the environmental benefits, the reducing pollution and the emissions that cause climate change. And then the third bucket is a little bit more wonky for folks who think about how our power grid works. As we add more diverse electric end uses to that power grid, the grid actually ends up functioning better because it's got sort of more options to make it work. So there are 3 sets of metrics. And in general, we say something is beneficial if it achieves at least one of those without hurting the other 2. So if a product reduced your bills, but didn't cause more pollution, but didn't really improve our pollution, we'd say that was beneficial. In general, we're trying to get things, though, that hit 2 or 3 of these is sort of the way we're thinking about. So that's at a theoretical level. So let me now kind of switch to a more practical level and talk about some of those things that are at the core of beneficial electrification. Electric vehicles is the right example to start with because this is the example that's moving the fastest and is likely to be one that you're seeing in headlines all over the place. We're talking about cars, trucks, buses, fire trucks, all becoming all electric. And this is very much happening now. So the experts tell us that by 2025, an electric vehicle will not cost more than the comparable gas-fired car. So whether you're talking about a pickup truck or an SUV or a sedan, there will be that cost comparability by 2025. The reality is, though, if you think about life cycle costs, because when you own a car, it's not just about the purchase price, it's also about gasoline and oil changes and other maintenance. If you take full cost of ownership into it, electric vehicles are already a bargain today. And we've got some resources we're going to share out with folks after this event. And one of the articles is a citation about those studies. So there's very clear sort of financial benefits to electric vehicles. There are also really significant public health benefits. If you've ever been behind a school bus or a transit bus that is running, you know that the diesel emissions from those buses are substantial. Well, an electric bus has no emissions. So now we're talking about cleaner air, often where our kids are in those buses. And in a similar way, when you have an electric vehicle, you don't have carbon monoxide in your garage. You can warm up an electric vehicle in the garage attached to the house without jeopardizing your family's health. So lots of benefits around electric vehicles. And I would say this is the market in electrification that's moving the fastest. We're going to see a lot of changes here really quickly. The second category I want to talk about is cooking. So if electric vehicles are the market that's moving fastest, induction cooking and letting go of gas stoves is probably the market that's most emotional. Okay, because people who love to cook very often love their gas stoves. The trouble is there is a growing body of literature, of health literature, public health literature about the pollutants caused in your kitchen when you cook with gas. And, this is in your kitchen where your family gathers. And we're talking about nitrous oxide, we're talking about particulates, and I would posit to you that within a decade, we're going to think it's inconceivable that we all had gas stoves in our kitchens this close to. When I found this picture, this looks like an island to me, and I picture that there's little stools over here where little people could be sitting, and it's just like, no. The other thing I'll say here is induction. So induction stoves, this is not the electric stove that folks who are really good cooks tend to hate. This is induction cooking where there's magnets in the between the pan and the burner, and off is immediately off and cool to the touch, versus the kind of electric stove that would maintain heat there and be a health risk of some way. And just when I think about the induction stoves, I think about my grandparents had a coal burning stove in their basement. And, as I grew older, it seemed inconceivable to me that they burned coal inside their house where my mother grew up. I think we'll think that about these gas stoves in another decade or so. So that's the cooking piece. The other piece to talk about when we talk about buildings and electrification is heat pumps. So heat pumps sound like a new thing, but they're not a new thing. If you have an air conditioner, you have a heat pump. You have a refrigerator, you essentially have a heat pump. A heat pump is a device that is able to take ambient air and pull heat or cooling from it for use in a concentrated way. So there are heat pump water heaters that will obviously heat your water. There are a whole option of air source heat pumps. Susan's going to talk about the cold climate air source heat pump she has that replaces her furnace and her air conditioner to provide all the heating and cooling. Some people, though, have a dual fuel situation. They have an air source heat pump that provides some of the heating and all of the cooling, and is coupled with the furnace that provides heating in the really cold days. Another option here is mini splits. These are like tiny heat pumps that can hang on a wall. And if you were putting an addition on your house, you could heat that with a mini split instead of adding ductwork to that new addition. So there's lots of ways heat pumps can work. There's also ground source heat pumps that instead of taking that heat from the ambient air, take it from underground. So lots of ways that these heat pumps talk, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this after Susan's example. So that those are some of the areas where we see electrification happening. Before I close, I want to just give you a sense of where I think these markets are. So we're talking about big levels of change here. Anytime we talk about big change, there are challenges associated with those changes. In this case, there are signals we get from costs that can make it harder to make these changes. We talked about how electric vehicles are more expensive than gas cars up front right now. That's a barrier. That's a barrier for people moving forward. Another challenge that I would see is that right now, natural gas prices, well, a little bit less this winter, until this winter, natural gas prices had been artificially low for almost a decade. And that made people more skeptical about the idea of heat pumps or how cost effective this could be. I think too, for some folks, you might have experienced electric resistant space heating or an electric water heater at some point in your life that was really expensive to run. Okay, these heat pumps are not that resistance heat. This is a lot less expensive to use, but we have those memories. And, you know, sort of coincident with that, when I think of the other challenges, they're the human challenges in this. Salespeople tend to want to sell customers things that other customers bought and liked. So whether we're talking about electric vehicles or heat pumps, it can be difficult to have folks be brave about selling those new products. And change is just hard for us as human beings. You know, I've got this photo here of a rear view mirror. None of us would ever drive forward down a highway looking in the rear view mirror. But a particular thing about humankind is that we tend to look at what we've done in the past to guide things in the future. We're in the midst of an important change here, and that's a challenge. So we need to not look in the rear view mirror because that's not very helpful. We need to look to these new ways of doing things. And a key piece of that, I always think, is thinking about where the bright spots are, what helps us move forward. Dane County has more electric vehicles than anywhere else in Wisconsin. Everyone on this call probably knows someone who drives an electric vehicle. And you know what? If you think you don't, you do now, because Susan drives one and so do I. So you know people as of tonight that drive EV owners tend to be huge advocates for electric vehicles. Don't even get us started on all the reasons we love our EVs. So you've got a word of mouth community there around electric vehicles. We've also got institutional examples. Forest Edge Elementary, the newest elementary school in the Oregon area school district, is an all-electric facility and net zero. They have on site at that school solar panels that provide all of the electricity that powers their heating, cooling, computers, cooking, lighting, everything going on in that school. And there are other net zero energy facilities under construction across our area. So there are examples you can see. And then of course, there are folks like Susan, who is leading the way in her personal life and is going to talk to us a bit more about her experiences. So from my view, electrification, incredibly important, and we can do this. And I'm going to stop sharing so Susan can start.
Okay, I think I'm doing it. So, okay, so yes, thank you, Kathy. That was a great preparation for what I'm about to say. So, see if I can just get my slides to switch. There. So what I want to do is start by saying that now that you've heard Kathy talk, it's probably a little easier to make a decision that yes, you're going to electrify. You have to make a decision, and then it's a good idea to develop a plan. And I just learned actually today that there is a free downloadable guide about how to electrify your home at rewiringamerica.org. So you might want to go there. I kind of wish I'd been able to read something like that before I started. Another thing that's really important that I kind of wish I'd known before, although it didn't really turn out to be an issue for me, it's really important to plan early retirement of your air heating and cooling and your water heating appliances. And the reason that's important is because I think it's 80 or 90% of furnace times that people change their air heating systems is when their gas furnace dies. And you have an emergency call to an HVAC person. They come and they say, oh yeah, lady, I got a thing right here in my truck and I can replace that tonight, and then you won't get cold. And so then people like that if you're in that situation, you end up with fossil fuel buyer's remorse, because you're like, gosh, I really actually wanted to go with an air source heat pump, but I didn't know the contractor that I needed. And as Kathy said, these contractors are still in a whole state of transition, and it's not that easy to necessarily go out and find one right away. And another thing to bear in mind if you're really thinking about this, is that you need to do electrification readiness, which means that if you have an old house and your electrical panel is not ready for some of these electrical shifts, then that can slow you down too. So you want to have your electrical panel kind of up to speed. And if you think your furnace is going to go, you might want to really seriously get into the process of figuring this out. And that's because, as Saul Griffiths points out in his wonderful book, Electrified, the major financial hurdles in electrifying our houses are what we do with home heating, and to a certain degree, what we do with water heating. And so we have to plan for those in order to make really good decisions about that. And the other thing I want to say is that my guess is that almost everybody that's in the room here tonight is already kind of thinking about this. It is a journey, and you have to take it step by step. It definitely doesn't happen fast unless, well, maybe it could happen fast. It didn't happen fast in my life. It took over a year. So this is what let's see, I'm having trouble making this slide. Oh, there we go. Okay, so here's my plan. I did a little bit of electrification readiness, but it actually, and these are two things that are going to be optional to electrifying a house, but they really have a lot to do with electrifying your life. If you want to get an EV, and you want to install solar. And in my case, the installation of a EV charger and the installation of the solar electrification of the electrical readiness of my panel came with that. The people who did that just happened during those stages. So what I did here was there's the EV in the driveway, and then this is the situation with respect to getting the panels. So in the summer of 2020, there's the back of my house, and there's the back of my house this winter with panels all in place. So that particular phase, I'm not going to talk about the EV cost. That happened back in 2019, or 2018 actually, or was it 2000? No, beginning of 2019. But the solar panels, in my case, the solar folks that I worked with, Full Spectrum, charged me $14,500 with the tax credit and the focus on energy incentive. I ended up paying, somewhere close to $9K. So then the next thing in my plan was to improve the energy efficiency of my old house. It is a 90-year-old house. And some energy efficiency work had been done, but not enough. So I started by getting a home energy analysis. And that came back like, yeah, you got a bunch of leaks. And, if you really want to be able to efficiently heat your house with an air source heat pump, you probably want to increase the energy efficiency of the house. So then I had to hire an insulation contractor. And after they did their work, they were fabulous. Then the energy analysis person came back and told me that I got a 29% improvement in leakiness, or loss of leakiness, I guess would be the better way to put it. I don't have any pictures of the insulation contractor, but anyway, I'll just move on. And then comes, but I do have costs for it. The energy efficiency analysis was $450. The installation was expensive. But I will have to say that was done in like June of 21. And all during the summer, I noticed difference right away. This house kept its cool so much better. I almost never had to run AC. It was just amazing how much that additional energy efficiency made, both in terms of the pleasure of living in the house and also in terms of cost. So that's something that is a good thing to do, whether or not you even go on with the electrification. Okay, next in my plan, I had to do some early retirement of each of my fossil gas appliances. So in my case, I happen to have an electric dryer, which I almost never used, but I didn't have to worry about that. I had a dual source oven slash stovetop. The stovetop was gas, the oven was electric. And then I had to make some decisions about whether I was going to go with ground source, as Kathy was pointing out, or air source. And once I made that decision, I had to find the cold weather air source HVAC folks. And then I had to go on to the installation, and then I had to find someone to install the air source water heater. So I'm going to show you a few pictures here. Back to the stove. Here is that dual source stove. And on top of this, you see two induction stovetops that I bought at Home Depot for $170 each. So it was close to $400 with the taxes. And this other picture over here just shows you how what I did was I took all the really things off from the gas stove and put these lovely induction stovetops on top of my stove. And I plugged them into the 120 volt outlets that I have here. And bam, I love them. I absolutely love them. I can't imagine going back to gas. I can't tell you how easy it is to clean this stuff and how well it works. It's just fun. And mostly people who are working with induction with 120 amps are not going to get quite the performance that if you were to go to an appliance store and buy one of these systems, it would be set up probably for 240. And if I was getting 240 into these stovetops, it would go even faster. And as it is, it's really fast. So that's that story. I did that in like February of 21. And I just taped those knobs over so that my grandchildren wouldn't accidentally turn the gas on underneath the induction stovetops. That would have been a drag. and then I chose, as Kathy said, I did choose I think it's the Primo air source, cold weather air source heat pump. It's made by Mitsubishi. It's a Mitsubishi P. It works with the forced hot air ducts in my house. And right here, you can see this little top section here. That's where the electric resistance coil backup unit is. It has not gone on. This system is guaranteed down to minus 13 Fahrenheit, at which point, if the, this is the outside unit, which is it exchanged this, brings in heat from the outside, or and takes it into the inside and then sends it up into my ducted system. And in the summer, it takes heat out of the house and puts it in the outside. But if this thing finally freezes at minus 13, then the resistance backup coils kick in. Bob has been asking me all winter long, well, did your electric resistance coils kick in yet? And I was like, no. And I run down in the morning and put my hand there to see if they're hot, and they're not. And so this system has worked really beautifully down to minus 10 so far. And yeah, so then I'm going to go to the next stage. This is the air source water heater, which is set up right next to the air source heat pump. So those are my pictures. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about, okay, this is the last piece. This is the real chunk of what I had to do. These are the devices in my house that had been using gas that needed to move to electric. The induction stovetop was $400. I integrated electrical readiness in there because I didn't know how to fit it into what happened with the EV, and the air source heat pump needed to have some electrical work and so forth. So I just put in my electrician's bill in there. The air source heat pump was 15, and the water heater was a little over 2. And so that brings the total cost. It's a pretty big sticker, I suppose, but it's not that big if you think about the fact that at some point you're going to have to replace, because furnaces live 15 to 20 years max. Also your air conditioners also need to be replaced. So this bill here represents the replacement of both a furnace and an air conditioner that will last for a long time. So that price is actually not out of line with what I would have done if I'd had to replace those two devices. And the hybrid water heater, well, my gas water heater was getting old and it didn't work very well. And so there was that cost. So those are the costs. If you want to look at the whole picture, you may or may not want to get or be able to get solar panels. You may or may not need to do energy efficiency for your house if you happen to have a new house that's that's very well insulated. But if you do have gas devices in your house, you will have to replace those, and these are the ones that I replaced. So the sum total, yeah, is kind of big, but I needed to do all of these things, and the value is huge, and I'm going to explain more why. So this is, I know a lot of people have been asking me, well, how much energy did you use, and what about the cost? Well, so I looked back at my 2019 bills, which is when I was using both gas and electric. And I was, during this time, charging my EV. All of my transportation costs were incorporated into this $2,200. And so this is the bill. I did not go back and get the kilowatt hour and the number of therms that I used. I'll talk about that a little bit later if there's time. Then in 2020, I did put in the kilowatt hours I put in and the money I paid to Madison Gas and Electric. There was there's not a whole lot of difference in cost. Well, actually, there is, this isn't weather adjusted, but I began to make a huge difference in my life here with, let's see, this is wrong. I started selling, this arrow is wrong. I moved this around. This arrow should point to here. This is when I started selling solar to Madison Gas and Electric. My solar was installed in September of 2020. And you can see what happened to my my bills. That represents the change to having solar on my house. And then my bills are a little bit complicated because not only did I start selling solar back to MG&E, but I also moved to time of use, which is where you charge your car and you wash your dishes and you use your electricity when time of use prices are low instead of during max hours. And that improves the dollars that you spend that you pay to Madison Gas and Electric. Then we look at 2021, and you can see that all during this period, my bill is low because I'm selling a lot of electricity to Madison Gas and Electric, down to $20 last May, 21 in June, blah, blah. And then this is where I told MG&E to cut off my fossil gas. And what happens when you do that is you immediately lose the $22 service charge per month. And then this is the shoulder season. I didn't really use my air source heat pump, didn't do much with using my hot water heater. Then I kicked in with the use of the air source heat pump in November and in December. And most recently, in full disclosure, during this last period between December 15 and Jan 15, I jumped up to 13 1,332 kilowatts, billed at $186. So that's the highest bill I've paid. I want to also observe that during that period of time, as those of you who have solar on your roofs know, we had a bunch of snow followed by freezing rain, which kept the snow cover, even on sunny days, from enabling us to get solar. So between the very, very cold temperatures and the loss of solar, I had an unusually high bill there. So anyway, during 2021, I used about as many kilowatt hours as in 2020, but I only paid $619 to Madison Gas and Electric. So it's kind of quick. And one of the things I want to remind you is that these dollars and kilowatt hours represent all my transportation costs, as well as house maintenance, managing my house. And I also want to say that I did look at my fossil gas costs for the 2 years prior to shutting off the gas in September of 21. And those 2-year prices were $479 and $500, which is 49% less than the average for a home of my size in terms of fossil gas use. So the fact that I dropped fossil gas, in my case, actually the difference would be less noticeable than it would be for people who are using more fossil gas than I had been. So, it's just kind of complicated because how Madison Gas and Electric bills are, and they're hard to understand, and there's a lot going on. There's contributions, there's base rates, there's blah blah. There's a lot of stuff going on. So that's it. That's my story, and I'm ready to stop sharing and move over to the questions and answers.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, both you, Kathy, and Susan. Very thought-provoking and stimulating presentation. Basically, I'm going to invite people to raise your digital hand if you want to have a spoken question, and you can find your button for that at the bottom of your Zoom's window under the reactions icon. And hopefully that's sufficient for most of you to be able to find and click on that. And additionally, you can feel free to throw questions into the chat. I will just observe that there's been a somewhat vigorous discussion flowing in the chat, where some concerns have been raised about essentially imperfections in the system. How even if we get EVs, then we still have a coal-fired power plant somewhere that's providing the electrons and issues of that sort. So Kathy, in particular, from kind of a global and systems perspective, could you just kind of maybe comment on the challenges we're recognizing are there and the hope and strategies for the future?
Yeah, certainly. And I think, there's a challenge of consolidated pages of boiling down 200 pages of strategy in the climate action plan into a single slide so I got through everything. When I talked early on about those 4 strategies, the first and most important one is around efficiency, and what I would in a very simple way say is, that we stop doing dumb stuff like idling vehicles for 20 minutes a day kind of thing. But all of that makes a significant difference and helps us. And we're in the middle of a climate crisis. So we've kind of got to take the tools we've got and move forward. I focused tonight on electrification. At the county, we actually harvest renewable natural gas from the landfill and run more than half of the county snowplows with that fuel, which is very clean too. I mean, there are other pieces to this. They're not going to scale at the level of electrification. We tend to focus on electrification because this is the piece that really has the ability to scale to the level of the crisis we've got. So I think that, yeah, there was maybe some sense that I was saying it was the only piece. Trust me, I'm a huge advocate of bicycles and transit and all of those other pieces too. It just wasn't where our focus was tonight.
Thanks. And Susan, do you have anything you might want to add in that regard or on that topic?
No, I think we should go to questions. Thanks.
Okay. So not seeing any hands at the moment. I'm going to pull something from the chat here. I'm noticing a question from Lisa about wondering what options we have for getting more user-friendly reports from MG&E so we can more easily track our energy usage and costs.
I'd love to take that for just a minute. And it's partly because like 45 minutes before this session started, I got a call from someone at MG&E who was like, oh, I heard that you wanted some clarification about your bill. I had called them earlier today and they didn't call back to me in a timely fashion. And the next thing she's like, we're so excited to help people with electrifying their houses. And I want to help you understand as much as possible what your data mean and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, I mean, I told her that the bills are very confusing and she knows that, but I think that what we're seeing with Madison Gas and Electric is a big willingness to help. They're not there yet, but they're on the path. And I've had no interactions with Madison Gas and Electric that were anything but pleasant. Even when I called them up in September to say, please turn off my gas, which was, I must say, a great delight on my part. They were like, well, why? Are you moving? And I was like, well, no, I actually am not using gas anymore. And so they were like, oh, okay. And then they turned it off the next day. Took them a while. They billed me for, their $22 service charge during the next month. And I was like, I think you actually shouldn't have done that. And they were like, oh yeah, sorry. So they're coming along. That's my opinion.
So I want to just build on that because Lisa's question is a really good one. And utility bills, everybody's utility bill everywhere is not very readable. There are regulatory challenges there, but somebody in the chat noted MG&E has a really good My Account system. And so if you don't look at your energy usage through MG&E's My Account, you should go to their site and set up that access for yourself. Because you can see charts where they're going to compare your home to other homes of comparable vintage. You get to be on a bell curve and see where you are on that bell curve, and it might motivate you to move to a different place on the bell curve. You can, see the aggregate data in ways that is pretty helpful. So I really can't say enough about like the work they've done there it's not in the bill, but it's online in a pretty bite-sized way.
It's coming.
Great.
Kermit,
I do have a
something.
question. Do you have something that follows up on
I want to
Kathy's?
say something that I didn't get to say that I think is important that I didn't say in my presentation, and that is that while I was looking for air source heat pump contractors, this is really important. I'm sorry I didn't say this, so I just want to jump into it. I called and talked with at least three, definitely three, possibly more in terms of quick phone conversations. Really good HVAC people I had worked with in the past. They were all good. They were all thoughtful, friendly, supportive, and they were all like, I can give you a really good air source heat pump that will work plus 14. And I was like, that's not going to do it for me. I want to get rid of my gas. And I need something that goes down to minus 14. And they said, sorry, that's not us. And so I kept going and I kept looking. And finally I had to go to Milwaukee, which is where I found the Midwest heating and cooling folks. And they were like, oh yeah, we know that. We do Mitsubishi P and other things. We've been selling these all over, So the challenge of finding an HVAC person who is going to be able to do what you want is something that does take time, and we have to push the market. We have to make clear to the HVAC people in our community that they've got to get on board with this, or else they're going to keep trying to sell us what worked for past decades, but isn't going to work in the future. Thanks.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, thank you for that clarification and cautionary note. Laura, your beige hand against the beige wall made it a bit of a challenge, but I do see that hand. And so please unmute and share your question.
Okay, well, hi. Mine's kind of a little bit on like life cycle costing. I'm in a little bit of a unique situation. I just moved to Middleton, excuse me, in 2019 and got a newer house. I came from an older house, so I had done a lot of stuff and had electric, gas, or electric stove and stuff. And now the house that we bought, which was a spec house, it has gas in it, a gas furnace. It's newer, but now I'm wondering, I know there's a cost to you. This is a fairly new unit, and just switching out. Like, I've got an old car. My Mini Cooper is 13 years old, but it only has 47,000 miles on it. Should I get a new EV or wait till this thing dies? So I'm in that, like, what do I do? I've got a less than 2-year-old stove. I have an older car that's well maintained, but it's gas. And then kind of embedded in all that, my husband liked the idea of radiant heat. Can you get electric radiant heat?
Good questions all, especially addressing the fact that there's embodied carbon in things you have. And so when does the life cycle tip the scale? Kathy, I suspect you've had to scratch your head with that from a policy level, and Susan, that may have come up in your individual deal. So Kathy, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, so the reality is, Laura, nobody has very good answers on this. There aren't, like, there isn't. In the chat about another thing, I just posted a calculator about the sort of EVs versus gas and your power mix. I wish I had a similar calculator somewhere that says, okay, when is it better to get rid of the old fridge and get a new, more efficient one, and when is it better to keep it for a while? There's not very good tools. I think there is a balance there. There's a thing Susan said that's really important, though, and that's this there's a point where you're risking that something can fail. Now, maybe with your car that isn't for another 5 years, but you don't want to get in the situation where the car fails and now you have to have a new car right away, and there's a 6-month supply chain crisis, and so you can only buy something that isn't very fuel efficient because that's all that's available to you. I mean, that's a very real challenge for us with things like our heating and cooling equipment, because we don't think about that stuff very much. And so it seems like it wasn't that long ago that we got our last furnace, but when I stop and think about it, it was actually 12 years ago. So we're like, okay, we're starting to approach that moment where it could fail. And what happens when it fails is you call someone in crisis, and whatever they have on their truck, you buy. Because it's February in Wisconsin and it's not viable to not have something. And so that, Susan, when you said that, I thought that's this really important thing that we have to think about, how we get people, because nobody wants to, I mean, your furnace is not that interesting to you. It's not a thing you think about very much, but being ahead of the curve in terms of, oh, the last time I got a furnace tune-up, the guy said, this unit isn't going to be around that much longer. Okay, we need to start, if we're going to think about electrification, we should be planning, in that advance.
Planning early retirement. Yeah, Laura, your situation, it sounds like it's really challenging, but I just wanted to add to what Kathy was just saying, that my furnace and air conditioner actually weren't on their last legs. But what I was able to do was work with my HVAC folks agreed to take those units and all the embedded carbon that they had in them and the good life that's left in them, and install them in the home of a friend whose equipment really was awful, really super inefficient. And they did that as part of the, they got paid to do it, but they did it. So that equipment did not get trashed. It's still being used, which is a really nice way to help with your, my remorse about early retirement of that equipment was lessened because of that. But I think the main thing that, well, there's two things. At some point, you are going to have to replace that stuff. It might not be now. Certainly, Saul Griffith's point is he doesn't expect everybody to go out and replace essentially brand new stuff. But be ready to get a plan and be ready so that when that time comes, you get the right thing and you don't end up with fossil fuel remorse. And then the other thing is that and then you also have to look into financing. I had the money, so I was able to do this, and I was restless because I just couldn't, I was just emotionally not happy about burning fossil gas in my house. And so I made the choice to move when I did because of that. So everybody has their own set of issues and decision points to make.
Thanks.
It's not easy though. I agree, it's not easy.
Yep. Thank you very much. I see a couple more hands, and so we'll move along. Kathleen Fitzgibbons, if you can get your question on unmute,
Yep.
and if you can
Yeah.
share your screen, that would be wonderful. But
Not at the moment.
whatever you're comfortable with, I understand.
Yeah. So I actually sort of two questions. One is around incentives. Like Susan just mentioned, obviously there is an upfront cost, and you get those longer term savings, but it can be harder to sell it that way when people just see the big $10,000s of dollars number. So one, is the state or county or city of Madison planning anything in the way of incentives for beneficial electrification? And then the second part, as far as getting the word out, spreading this idea to more people, does Dane County have like a kiosk at home expos, or working with relevant companies? I'm curious about that front as well.
Thank you. Excellent questions. I think Kathy, sounds like that lands in your lap right off the bat, but Susan may have some firsthand experience as well. So
Yeah, I can go first. So on the heat pumps, there are some focus on energy incentives now. Focus on energy, it's interesting. They're no longer offering incentives for central air conditioner. A heat pump is so much more efficient at cooling than your central air conditioner. They've increased the incentives on heat pumps that replace central air conditioners and take some of that heating load. So there are some incentives there. That's about, and then there are federal tax incentives on some electric vehicles, but that's, there were more proposed incentives and really more funding that could have flowed to local governments to help us incentivize electrification under the Build Back Better bill that didn't pass, sort of thing. So we're sort of, I think it's fair to say at the local level, we're trying to figure out what we can do in that way. In terms of spreading the word, Dane County is actually involved in a kind of ad hoc coalition that's been forming with some of the HVAC industry, the heating and cooling industry, and a few other communities and some advocates around electrification and heat pumps, and thinking about how we can move that market. I know the city of Madison their fleet division has been leading some efforts around electric vehicles and how we accelerate that. So there are things happening at different levels. We are not, so far, we've not been attending things like home shows to talk about these things. I think we're at an earlier stage than that. We're kind of focused on how we reach the HVAC industry and get them more comfortable selling this technology so that moves forward a little bit. But I think there will come a point where we're probably there talking about electrification in those ways. I think maybe the other thing I should say about this is there are local governments across Wisconsin that have ambitious climate plans. The city of Middleton does, the city of Madison does, Dane County does, but it's also the case that Eau Claire and Racine and Milwaukee and Green Bay and La Crosse all have ambitious goals too. And so there's a level of local governments kind of collaborating with each other, trying to figure out how we move these issues across the whole state. And that work's only about a year old. So we're still kind of figuring out how to get big things done. But the fun fact I like in that is 1 in 3 people in Wisconsin live in a community with ambitious climate goals. So that's a pretty significant piece of us.
Okay, thanks. You know what? The library runs a tight ship. They want us to be ending sharp at 7:30. So I want to give Bob Owen a chance to ask his question. And then if we can have a brief response, then I will have some closing comments. So Bob?
Thank you, Kermit. My question is for Susan. Susan, how big a system do you have in terms of BTUs to heat your house? And what is your square footage in that old house?
My square footage is 1,800 square feet. And I don't know the BTU answer, but I know that the Mitsubishi P is a 3.5 ton system. And
That's good.
and your HVAC people will definitely want to look at how efficient your house is, how much heat it's going to need, given its size, and then they will size the system to be sure that it's going to be adequate.
3.5 tons is a very reasonable size. Thank you for that answer.
Sure.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. We can't do it individually completely to solve the climate crisis, but we can and do need to act individually and also collectively. So thanks to all of our attendees who hopefully have learned something new about ways they can be empowered to take individual action. Thanks to Susan and Kathy for your presentations and the thoughtful and reflective answers to our discussion questions as well. There will be an email coming out from the library with a resource list document that will give you all sorts of additional resources to explore this topic further. There will also be a survey. We would appreciate your response to that as well. And don't forget that tonight's event is part of the Sustainable You series, emphasis on series, which will continue next month and be co-sponsored not only by the Middleton Public Library and the Middleton Sustainability Committee, but the Friends of Pheasant Branch. The 6:30 p.m. Thursday, March 17th session is titled Pheasant Branch Creek, Where Does All This Water Come From? And I think we can pop a link into the chat for people to glance at briefly and grab hold of if they can. Otherwise, it should also be in the email that will be forthcoming. So again, thank you all. Feel free to unmute and holler out your applause and appreciation, or just let off some steam because, you know, it's a Zoom meeting.